Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I'm going to call this part 2. The first one was essentially bad internet coverage. Actually, the internet coverage here has been pretty rock solid. It was, for whatever reason, I started getting into this weird internet hiccup. I went down, reset it. Hopefully that fixes our issue. I'm going to pick up where we left off. Where we left off was Sanders having a conversation about the BDS movement. Or he's going into a conversation about the BDS movement. In the first video, we had a conversation about why he doesn't believe running as a third party is a valid way of going about it. Not necessarily a valid way, but running as a third party is what he's trying to do. Let's say it that way. His current refrain that he's stuck with is, I'm trying to resuscitate the Democratic Party, something to that effect. My argument is you call for a political revolution. What did you think a revolution was? I mean, come on. Let's talk about, politically stretching a word. That is, you have this double irony of sorts. But whatever, that being said, let's move on to the next one. The BDS movement. He gets into the conversation about the BDS movement. Now, I think of everything that I've heard up to this point, there's nothing more that I disagree with than this. It just seems completely inconsistent. Now, I'm going to let you hear it first. And just as a highlight of my own fuck up and how I stumbled onto this, I was on Twitter and I ran across a gentleman who kind of made the point. He's like, in this clip, Mr. Sanders argued against a one-state solution. I was like, right here. I misunderstood what he was saying. And in that misunderstanding, I was able to find it. So, make resistance. Thank you very much. Good looking out. And my bad. I didn't say anything bad, but still, I criticized incorrectly. Sanders, talking about BDS, could not be more wrong. But let him defend himself.
Not to defend Israel, but to say why only Israel. You want to talk about human rights? Let's talk about human rights.
Should the UN shield Israel from criticism?
No, of course not.
Okay. This letter also denounces the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement known as BDS. You, in your lifetime, are a longtime proponent of nonviolent protests. This, in the eyes of many Palestinians, is the effective way to get Israel to comply with international law and respect Palestinian human rights. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I mean, look, I respect people will do what they want to do, but I think, again, our job as a nation is to do everything humanly possible to bring Israel and the Palestinians and the entire Middle East to the degree that we can together. But no, I'm not a supporter of that.
That answer makes no sense to me. Our job as a nation is to do everything humanly possible to bring Israel and Palestine to the negotiation table, with the exception of that. With the exception of that. Why that? The thing that took me so long, when I was trying to start at 3:30, I was looking up Bernie Sanders' position on the apartheid regime in South Africa. I wanted to know whether or not Bernie Sanders was for essentially a boycott. Because if he's for the boycott in South Africa, what makes this different? Why is this particular one different? Meaning this idea of bringing pressure to bear upon a foreign rogue state that holding an apartheid regime where they have an open air ghetto. What's different? What is different? Why on this issue? And by the way, nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance. We disagree with the way you're going about your affairs, so no, we don't want to participate in buying your goods or your products or your services. Peace. We're not doing anything aggressive or violent. We're just not economically getting involved with you because of what you're doing. You're being immoral, and you're acting as if we're supposed to pretend that you're not behaving immorally. How are you against that? How are you against that? You can make an argument that Bernie Sanders chaining himself to the rail with that African-American woman is something similar. I'm sorry, it is. Now, in this particular case, Sanders chaining himself as this way of nonviolent resistance, same thing. The only difference is this one is somewhat of an economic weapon. Sanders, in this case, was more so gumming up the works for you could say law enforcement in that capacity. I'm just making the point. Non-violent resistance. Why this? Why are you against this? Let him explain. I don't quite understand the position. Now, if you want to be completely partisan and you say, I'm for a Jewish state, it's not that people are against a Jewish state, mind you. They're just against what the Jewish state is doing. Or you could say, I don't necessarily believe in Jewish states or Israeli states or whatever. I'm saying this poorly. It's a long day. My point is, I don't like this idea of religious states. That's the first point. And the second point, beyond not liking this idea of a religious state, these are legal constructs. It's not religiosity. It's not done by God. It's done by man. It's done by human beings. Get this religious nonsense out of the conversation. I don't like this idea of you have a state behaving poorly, to put it as an understatement. Let him explain himself. But I don't understand that position. I mean, ultimately, if you're being completely partisan and you say, look, I just want Israel to exist regardless, and I want it to have complete domination and advantage, and I don't want anything done that would adversely affect it in even the minor degree. Now, I think the problem here that Sanders knows is that nonviolent resistance works, in that the same boycott sanction movement that took place for South Africa works. It works. And I strongly suspect that the reason he dislikes this is because of his various next answer. At the very least, these two answers, I think, play on one another. Let's let him answer. And I don't think I did that one justice, but I hope I made my point. How are you against a nonviolent movement? Like, that part blows me away. This is not, it's setting fire to anything. Israelis have been out there murdering other human beings. Put this shit in context. This has been going on for God knows how long. Palestinians have been living in inhospitable conditions for years. And the most tepid of economic pushbacks from the community, Mr. One Blarney Sanders is against. All right, explain yourself, Blarney Sanders. Why are you against a nonviolent movement against an apartheid regime?
Palestinians will say they've resisted violently, they get punished. They resist non-violently with BDS, they're also punished. June marks 50 years of occupation starting 1967. We know the occupation has no end in sight. We know that this is a government that doesn't plan on ending it. And talks have failed for a quarter century. What, if not BDS, is left for the Palestinians to do?
Well, what must be done is that the United States of America must have a Middle East policy which is even-handed, all right, which does not simply supply endless amounts of money, military support to Israel, but which treats both sides with respect and dignity and does our best to bring them to the table.
It's increasingly evident that hopes for a two-state solution are almost dead. At the same time...
Wait, I want to put a pin in that before she goes into her next question. What he said there is not wrong, per se. I mean, it is true that it will take somewhat... With the 2 points. She's completely right in the way that she phrased that question. Ultimately, this idea of fairness and even-handedness has been a charade. I mean, nobody believes that. Ultimately, you've had a United States that has protected Israel while they've stolen more and more land and as they committed atrocities. That's the reality of the situation. She's right in the way she's phrasing it. Why not a nonviolent movement against this? Now, Sanders' answer is not necessarily wrong. I think it's not wrong, but it's I know what it is. It's not what she's asking. What she's asking is something different. And what he says doesn't answer what she says. Maybe that's my issue with this. So for example, they're mutually exclusive of one another. The BDS movement can exist whether or not the United States does what it does. What Sanders' his approach completely depends upon somebody getting in some kind of political situation where the political pressure on them in that situation would allow them to be even-handed in the way they go about their affairs. Good luck. Good luck. When have you seen that? I mean, I guess I'm making the point that you're talking about 50, 60 years. When have you seen this level of even-handedness? One side gets nuclear weapons, the other side, not so much. Not so much. And after one atrocity after the next. Do you know, after that last atrocity, or the atrocity, one of the last atrocities, I mean, there were more than one, but during the Obama administration, Obama's military was still giving them weapons after they were murdering and massacring civilians. It's amazing. Look, my point in this is they're mutually exclusive. They're mutually exclusive. Now, if Sanders, I don't know who this person is, but if this person gets in office and that person was to apply some kind of pressure to Israel, yes, he's right. He is right. But the question becomes, is that particular person going to get in office, and is that particular person going to actually do it? And what does that mean? Does that mean cutting back on the military support? Does that mean cutting back on the amount of money that you're sending them each year? Does that cut back on the armaments? What does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean carrot and stick approach to Israel? What does that mean? I am curious. I'm curious. And again, making a clear distinction that both of these things are mutually exclusive of one another. Bernie Sanders used an answer for something that was mutually exclusive to answer something else. What is wrong with the BDS movement? Play it back. I'll play it back. He gave me no answer. I mean, saying that the United States needs to play a role in it is nice, but that doesn't really get into what's wrong with the BDS movement. It's a non-violent movement. What's the problem, Sanders? I'm going to play it back just so we're clear. I don't want to mishear it.
Palestinians will say they've resisted violently, they get punished. They resist non-violently with BDS, they're also punished. June marks 50 years of occupation starting 1967. We know the occupation has no end in sight. We know that this is a government that doesn't plan on ending it. And talks have failed for a quarter century. What, if not BDS, is left for the Palestinians to do?
Well, what must be done is that the United States of America.
Okay, to be fair, she did ask him a different way. She said, what else could the Palestinians do? Fair enough. Fair enough. I wish he would have asked a slightly different question. What's wrong with the BDS? Why not BDS as opposed to something else? Or why not use a mutually exclusive? But fair enough. Fair enough. All right, let's go to the next one. And this is where he goes a little bit further into this idea of a two-state solution.
Sides with respect and dignity, and does our best to bring that to the table.
It's increasingly evident that hopes for a two-state solution are almost dead. At the same time, polls among Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are showing that they're increasingly in favor of a one-state solution with equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians alike and equal citizenship. Is that something you believe could happen, or is that something you support?
No, I don't. I mean, I think if that happens, then that would be the end of the state of Israel. And I support Israel's right to exist.
Do you think a two-state solution is still viable?
Yes, I think if there is the political will to make it happen, and if there is good faith on both sides, I do think it's possible. And I think there has not been good faith, certainly on this Israeli government. And I have my doubts about parts of the Palestinian leadership as well.
Here in the U.S., refugees...
Status quo. I mean, ultimately, you're talking about status quo. I mean, right now, you don't want to do BDS. So that's off the table for Bernie Sanders. I don't like that. I don't like that. You're hitting Israel too hard with BDS. Yes, they're murdering people. Yes, they have an open-air ghetto. Yes, they're torturing children. Yes, all that stuff is true. But not buying at their stores. That's a bridge too far. I don't like that. I'm Bernie Sanders. And then you go to the other section and you say, well, okay, so what do you want to do? Well, I think we need to get America involved. America has been involved for 50 years. Yeah, but we need them to be fair. It's been 50, 60 years, Sanders. It's been 50 years. You don't want people to get involved through BDS, and you believe that America is going to somehow get involved. Who? You're talking about yourself? Are you talking about yourself? And this last point about the two-state solution thing. most Palestinians at this point are willing to give up Palestine in order to have one state. They're willing to give up their dream of the land that you guys stole. You took their land. You stole their land. But you want Israel to have a land. So Israel gets a place, but not Palestine. Palestine doesn't get a place. Now, in your case, you're saying you still have this idea that they have a two-state solution. And anytime you go for this idea of a one-state solution with equal rights, you're giving up Israel. I've heard this argument before, and I guess technically you're right. Technically, that is giving up Israel to some degree. This is why I believe in states. And I don't necessarily like to have this kind of religious connotation with this idea of states. The only other idea for Sanders is to somehow break up the integration of the countries. Netanyahu, and up to this point, Israeli modus operandi does not seem to be going in line with that. I understand that happened before. The previous or the next presidents after, not so much. Not so much. They've allowed Israel to essentially steal more land. The international community has stood by as they stole more land. I'm skeptical of this solution, and I'm skeptical that it's a solution at all. And let me explain what I mean by that. Under the conditions that Sanders sets the parameters, if you had an American president, and if that American president started to put pressure on Israel to essentially, I guess you could say, to deal in, peace talks, maybe I'm skeptical. I'm extremely skeptical, meaning in my head, I have to postulate that you have the fairest man on the planet, and that person is not necessarily being pulled for political reasons or political ends. That person doesn't exist. And even if you had a president who was able to take office, you're assuming that that person is not going to have any necessarily detractors or any pulls on him or tethers on him. And just as an example, even one Bernie Sanders, who's up here at other points have spoken out for Palestinian rights. Even in this case, he is against BDS, which is non-violent resistance against an open-air prison. I have to ask why. I mean, that's a weird thing to be against. And the idea that you're supposed to stay for the savior of America in order to do something about it. The whole point of the BDS is to make it, I guess you could try to say, balance the scales to some degree. Now, it's one thing if Sanders says, look, I don't believe it'll work. That's a different conversation. But right now, what we've been told is, I don't want Americans to do anything from the standpoint of BDS, meaning economic sanctions and divestment. I believe we need to get a president who's going to be fair and honest in dealing with both sides. And we need two sides that are also going to be fair and going about their negotiations. It's been 60 years, Sanders. It's been 60 years. I don't like this answer. I don't like this answer at all. From the standpoint, look, from the standpoint of somebody who's running in a political process, I get it. I get it. There are two things that I would say for it. I think there's certain lines in politics that people have a hard time crossing. And it is clear that one of those lines has to do with the state of Israel. They are our attack dog in the Middle East. And if we're honest, the relationship between the United States and Israel is, to some degree kindred. We took our land and essentially colonized it, killing all of the inhabitants of the land. And Israel has put its people into an open-air ghetto in which it expropriates more and more land. But it in no way wants to have a one-state solution. That's a little weird. I don't like this answer. But this is one Bernie Sanders. Let's see. What's the next topic? I don't remember the next topic.
Refugees are a politically divisive issue. We've seen them demonized by a lot of politicians and the public rather than embraced. The Trump administration wants to drastically reduce the number of refugees that they accept, even below Obama numbers, which were criticized as being too low. Do you believe that the U.S. has failed its moral obligations in accepting?
I think the entire world has failed its moral obligations. But I think what the United States, as the most powerful nation on earth, has got to do is do our best to bring people together, to try to hammer out what is enormously difficult. This is not easy stuff. Syria is not easy stuff. Israel-Palestine is not easy stuff. But that's what we've got to try to do.
What would you do if you were president in terms of Syria?
In terms of Syria, what I would do is demand that those countries, like Russia, which are supplying an incredible amount of arms and protection to Syria, stop doing it. Assad is a war criminal. He is killing tens and hundreds of thousands of his own people. And we have got to put pressure on Russia and Iran to stop supporting this war criminal. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
Senator.
You know, by that logic, so was Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's not so much that Bashar al-Assad is freeing slaves per se, but you have rebels trying to take down a government, in some cases helped by foreign involvement. We don't look at it through those terms. We look at it through purely the terms of, we don't look at it through those lenses. That's all. We always look at it through the lens of us looking at a foreigner and they're having their revolution as opposed to this other stuff. And it's not even a revolution. You have rebels who are trying to take down a government. Those rebels were funded in large part by Western forces. One Blarney Sanders pointing that out, saying the other way around of that equation, saying that Russia and Iran is somehow supplying Bashar al-Assad. Yeah, he is. In the same way that we and Western powers have been supplying terrorists. It is aggravating to listen to Sanders have these conversations because I know that he knows this. It's one of those things of it's like there's no way you don't know this. Meaning Sanders knows that we've been funding terrorists throughout the region of the world. He knows it, and yet he would still point out Bashar al-Assad. He would still point out Russia. He would still point out Iran and stuff. And I get it. There's political winds that you have to deal with. There's political gravity that you have to pay attention to. I don't like it when I hear it. I don't like it when I hear it. His Syria answer right in its ear. Satan has plagued my day. That's hilarious. The mic is horrible. Oh, you don't like this mic. Sable Genius. I do come here often, Tim. It's true, YouTube search my name and one word family. I'm the fat one. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. So because it was a question in a separate interview about BDS, all progressives obsess over that. Yeah, I mean, yes, because there's kind of a point behind it. If the government, for the most part, has had a dog and pony show, and with that dog and pony show, it is assiduously pretended that it was doing something on the issue of Palestine and Israel. That this eyesore, where you had this open-air ghetto, these refugees who were stateless at this point, whose land was being expropriated. The world knew it. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Now, or let me say that. I'm not going to say nobody cared, but at the very least, nobody cared enough to do anything. You had the United States pretending as if it was actually doing something, and everybody understood that millions, nuclear weapons, all sorts of military armaments, to one side. Protecting, meaning also protecting them in the United Nations when they're going through their cleansing period, where they're killing or putting people in prison or putting children in prison or shooting people for throwing rocks, or inciting people to throw rocks and then killing them. I'm talking about abuses that essentially have gone, unattended to. Now, lefties look at this and say, well, that's nonsense. That's pretty fucked up. And how on earth are you telling people that you shouldn't do everything up humanly possible, but don't do that? Don't do that. That's weird. That's strange. That's out of sorts. It's one thing if Bernie Sanders says, yes, we need to do everything that we can. I think a nonviolent movement is a great thing, but what needs to take place is United States government action. Those are different answers. Going after the BDS and saying, no, I don't think the BDS, categorically saying the BDS is not something people should do. Yeah, that's a problem. It rubs us a particular way. It rubbed us a particular way. As for apartheid pluralism, literally means separate but equal. So what you have to say about Canada now if you think we're such a great model? Well, I don't know the context that was being said. Oh, you're having a conversation with somebody. Let me switch this, because this mic is weird. And I'm going to my other one. So give me 1 second, guys. This day has been full of, this has been a weird day, to say the least. Nah, we'll go with it. I'll change it out after in the other video. So yeah, lefties are feeling some kind of way about the BDS stuff. They're feeling some kind of way about it. There was something else about this interview that I wanted to say. But I can't think of what it was. Your coverage of Syria was the best. You rock. Oh, thank you, okay. Two-state solution is dead. Sanders is a jerk. Patrick, what would we do about the war criminals from here? Anna Maxa, what would we want? Oh, what would we do about the war criminals from here? I think the point is, from the standpoint of the United States, or it depends if you're talking about the BDS. I think the point of the BDS is to express how you dislike what's taking place. And people look for reasons, they look for ways to go about doing that. The BDS was one of those ways of them doing that. I don't want to do business at a company or service that either supports or is an Israeli business. I think that makes perfect sense. If I knew somebody had slave labor, I may not necessarily want to do business with that company that's doing for slave labor. The idea that you would have Bernie Sanders saying, hey, it's okay to do business with that company that is slave labor, we need to come up with another solution, it's a little weird to me. It's a little weird. As for the United States, look, we don't have a moral high ground on this stuff. I'm just sorry we don't. The only thing, and on this I do agree with Sanders. Fairness. Be fair. We've been magnificently unfair. We've protected one side while at the same token, in an odd way, demonizing the side that was disadvantaged in this process. While, at least from the standpoint of the West, given a pass. I mean, after all, Netanyahu literally came down to the well of Congress, gave a speech. You even had Cory Booker sitting in the aisle betraying his own president, decrying the plan, the treaty that his own president put forth. Or not treaty, I'm sorry, his deal, his international deal, trade deal. It wasn't even a trade deal. It's not firing today, man. The deal that the president put forth. It's not for us to do anything per se. It's for us to stop doing stuff. Because that's the point that I think people are trying to get at. And I think even Sanders in this statement or this conversation was getting at. We need to stop giving all that money and weapons to all of these regimes in that particular area of the globe, including Israel. And we need to be fair in any kind of dealings that we're going to have with those from the standpoint of a peace process. And by the way, the unfairness that has been enacted from the standpoint of the United States has been a disinhindrance to peace. Why have a peace process when you have a political advantage just based on the person who's the arbiter in the conflict? Think of it from the standpoint of, you having a contest with the DNC. Hey, let's take one Bernie Sanders, for example. The DNC is running in a contest. The DNC is holding a contest the person that he's running against is Hillary Clinton, who has essentially all power over the DNC. Just doesn't seem fair. Democrats are trying to mold him into the next Democratic president. President. I love that. Thanks, Beltazar. That's hilarious. That's absolutely hilarious. In other words, the Arab Muslims came about over a dispute. What? The Arab Muslims. Jesus Christ. I'm of Jewish heritage. I support BDS because I haven't heard of a better idea to stop the persecution there, right? In Canada, I've signed a letter to support of my socialist caucus. And by the way, Democratic Socialists of America have signed on to the BDS. Yes, they have. Jamal, are you going to cover Trump's next Supreme Court pick? Unfortunately, yes, I'm going to have to. Yes, unfortunately, I might have to. It's aggravating. Utterly aggravating. Case D, it's at the bottom. I've had the link at the bottom of the page. You can see it all the way through without my interruptions. How can you refair genocide? I have no idea. And it's what's taking place over there. It makes no sense to me. And let me explain what I mean. It makes sense to me, but the logic that they're going with, it doesn't make sense to me why people think it makes sense. Let's say it that way, if that makes sense. They are supposed to be having negotiations. These negotiations have supposedly been going on for like 50 years. And in these negotiations, supposedly going on for like 50 years, in many of these cases, let's say most recently, Israel has continued to take land. They've been taking land. Blood dripping behind their guns, taking land. The United States has protected them in the taking of land. The United Nations has tried to condemn them for this, but ultimately the only thing they can do is shake their fists. They continue to take more land. What is the end goal of this? Meaning, what is this going to look like in X amount of time? Have you seen the I need to pull up the map. In one of my other videos, I'm going to try to pull up a map on how Palestine looked in the beginning versus how it looks now. What's the end point? What's the end goal? You've been taking more land. Now, you don't want to have a two-state solution. You don't want to have a one-state solution. And pretending as if a two-state solution... I'm sorry. They're saying they want a two-state solution. But if you're continuing to take more land, how are you going to have a two-state solution? And yet, you're also ruling out a one-state solution. That makes no sense. In their minds, if we have a one-state solution, that's no longer Israel. That's something else. And so we want a two-state solution. But we are continuing to take more land. But we're still continuing to take more land. So, the 10 people pure enough for you then? Uh-oh. I wouldn't be surprised if Bernie has been told, you support BDS or don't support Israel's right to exist. Kiss the nomination goodbye. Beltazar, I don't think anybody has to tell Bernie Sanders that. I think Bernie Sanders already knows that. I think he already knows it, which is kind of my point. Like, the position makes no sense. I don't want to necessarily say it's inconsistent. It just doesn't really make sense. It doesn't in any way touch what the United States may do. I think he full well understands that there is no way for him to get a presidential nomination if he supports BDS or if he says anything about Israel's right to exist. And the fact is, if you're talking about a one-state solution, you're talking about, in their minds, getting rid of Israel's right to exist. Yeah. Agreed. All right. I'm going to end this. I'm going to get a protein drink or something because, for whatever reason, I am running on fumes. Jared Beck is going to be here at 7 p.m. I'm going to have another video coming up immediately, maybe in 10-15 minutes after this video. But I will see you guys shortly. If not shortly, definitely at 7 p.m. with Jared Beck. But most likely, I'll see you guys in a few. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties today. Today has been a little weird. Thanks, everyone. And